Hi guys, time for me to do another book review. This time I'm reviewing a book that I've just finished reading. It's Insurgent by Veronica Roth, which is the second book in the Divergent series. Now Insurgent picks up exactly where the first book left off, literally the second that it finished. The idea is it's a sort of dystopian future. All young adults are split up into different factions, and those factions become like their family, their community where they live, and they're everything really. The main character, Tris Pryor, becomes a member of Dauntless, and in the last book, the first Divergent book, towards the end, she discovered that there was one of the factions had done something terrible and there was a war starting, and this book is carrying on from that. So the first book is all about setting up the foundations, explaining about the factions, explaining who Dauntless are, getting to know Tris, and this book is about the war as it starts and carries on. As usual, first impressions. I had pretty strong first impressions about this book. One thing really stood out to me, and that was that Insurgent carries on exactly where Divergent finished, and it don't waste any time in trying to go over old ground. Usually, I found when I read a sequel, you sort of get a kind of recap of what's happened. If there's a character crops up again, they just gently remind you who they are, and this book doesn't do that at all, and it really did my head in. In fact, I had to go back. At one point, I just closed the book and I had to go and look on the internet and look up what had happened in the first book to remind myself, because I was getting that frustrated at not having a clue what was going on. As I find with most young adult books, I found it a very easy read, which was lovely. It didn't feel like particularly hard work, and it was fast-paced and enjoyable. There was never a sort of a dull moment. I also found that very early on in the book I was interested in knowing what was happening. I wasn't exactly what I would call hooked and gripped, but I did want to know what was happening, and I was quite happy to keep on reading. It didn't feel like there was any build-up. It got straight in there, and that was quite refreshing. One of the strongest things I felt about this book was that the story gets going immediately and carries on. Now that also coincides with one of the negatives, which was that it just doesn't remind you. It assumes that you're reading this directly after having finished Divergent, which I would highly recommend. But for that reason, it's able to just get cracking and crack on with the story without any boring old build-up at the start, which was a great positive. Another really strong positive for me was that the book finished on a high, which always goes well for when you're rating it and what have you online, or when you're thinking about, do I read the third book? Because it ends on a high. The last sort of fifth of the book is really good, really hugely fast-paced, exciting, and I was completely gripped by it and wanted to know what was going to happen, and it did make me want to read the third book. I quite like young adult books for that kind of feeling like they're teaching me something. Although I am getting on in the world, I still like the feeling that they're trying to educate me, like I'm learning things, and not just like a sort of sciencey point of view, but from a sort of personal point of view. And there was a moment in the book where it had a little quote that I really liked, so I thought I'd share that as a positive. And it says, and I quote, "People, I have discovered, are layers and layers of secrets. You believe you know them, that you understand them, but their motives are always hidden from you, buried in their own hearts." I loved that, because I think it's so damn true. No matter how close you get to somebody, you never really know everything about them. Even the closest people in my life there's still so many elements of them that are completely secret. And I'm the same way with other people, and I think that's quite poetic, really. In terms of negatives, I feel like I've got quite a few, but then they weren't particularly significant negatives. They weren't off-putting enough to ruin the book. The positives, although there appear fewer of them, were more significant. One thing that's worth saying, I don't think it's as good as Divergent. I really loved Divergent. I loved learning about the world, learning about how all the different society had come to be, and I don't think I was as interested in reading a book about the war. But then it was the same for me in Hunger Games. I loved reading about the actual games, not so much the war that followed. The major negative for me was Tris. I know that she's supposed to be this strong female character, and I suppose she is in some ways, but in other ways she is just a whiny old teenager. I didn't feel that I related to her as I have done main characters in other books like The Hunger Games or Delirium. I didn't feel that I related to her at all. Her behaviours were a bit erratic. and I just couldn't figure her out, to be quite honest. I think in some ways she felt a lot more real than in Divergent. In Divergent it felt a little over the top that someone would go and throw themselves into this ridiculous world of danger and be absolutely fine with that, and not when it's completely 100% turnaround from their previous life. In this book I felt she was a lot more real, but unfortunately she just made ridiculous decisions that I couldn't follow the reasoning behind them. One minute she's saying that she loves somebody so much she'd do anything for them, the next minute she's completely ignoring them and going against everything they believe in. Don't know. I suppose some could say that there is more like real teenage love, that sort of, I love you so much I'd do anything for you, but somebody else wants me now, so I'll see you later. Sort of over the top when you're with them, but not real and deep. As I've said already, a big kicker for me was just the fact that this opportunity to have a really strong female character just descended into having a whiny old teenager. I feel a bit harsh saying that, because in the book, her parents had just been killed. Spoiler if you haven't read Divergent. But she was really whiny and irritating is how I'd describe her. So overall, on Goodreads I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I did go back at one point and try and change it to 4, but then I ended up on 3. I feel that my feelings actually are different to most people. Most people's reviews that I read on Goodreads really slate the book, to be quite honest, and they're focused on things that don't worry me. Fundamentally, I want a story that I enjoy and I'm happy reading, and I did enjoy it, and I was more than happy reading it. I read the second half of the book in about 12 hours. So that says a lot. I think that if you like Divergent, you will enjoy it. If you didn't like Divergent, then I highly expect you won't like this either, because it doesn't feel quite as good as the first book. My biggest piece of advice to anyone is to try and read the books quite close together. I think there was almost a year between me reading the first and the second, and I didn't have the foggiest clue who anyone was. I am planning to read the third book, and I'm planning to get it soon, because I don't want to be in the same position again, because it was really irritating, and I'd quite like to have everything fresh in my mind to read when I start reading the third book. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this wasn't too all over the place. I've been working all day today and my brain feels completely frazzled, so I hope that I was coherent enough. So apologies, but hope it's okay. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.